From Central Indiana's #1 news source, this is Fox 59 Tonight.
And good evening to you. Thank you for joining us here on the Fox 59 Now app on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you download the Fox 59 Smart TV app. It is on Apple TV, Roku, and on your Fire TV. And if you're watching on those, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube so you never miss a minute of what we're talking about here on Fox 59 Tonight. And tonight it is politics. It has been a very busy week at the Indiana Statehouse with a number of bills already been signed into law. Some of them passed in the same week that they were signed. And each of these bills will affect Indiana greatly. The biggest bill signed this week, Senate Bill 1, which will bring you property tax cuts, but will also make some change. Force some changes to budgets at local governments and schools around the state. To get more into everything that happened, we bring on our political director here at Fox 59. It is the very own Dan Spehler.
Hey, Cameron, good to see you. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's all the time that we've worked here in the same building, I've never got to share a screen with you.
This is the first time, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And it's a pleasure to have the host of In Focus. This is our little preview of what you'll have on your show coming up on Sunday.
We've got a lot to talk about this week. You touched on some of it there with property taxes, but also this news that state lawmakers are going to have $2 billion less to work with. I mean, all of these things kind of fit together. And as you raised the question, what's that going to mean for Hoosiers? What's it going to mean for local governments? There's a lot of concern, a lot of questions about that we're definitely going to dive into during this week's program Sunday morning on Fox 59 and CBS 4.
So let's start with Senate Bill 1 because that is the biggie. We had heard, that at first the governor wanted to cut millions and millions of dollars, and then that number went a little bit smaller. And now when it's all said and done, Hoosiers are going to be given a tax credit of up to $300.
$300, yeah. For homeowners.
For homeowners.
If you don't own a home, you don't really see the same kind of relief. And in fact, if you're a renter and you work for a living and your local government needs to raise its local income tax to make up for the shortfall in property taxes, you may end up losing on the deal. So it just kind of depends, right? There are some people who are going to, maybe do better from this legislation and others who might end up losing.
Well, it's you use the proper term on that because there you have property taxes and you have income taxes. So we're going to cut your property taxes, but now your local governments, school districts, cities can now raise income taxes. And of course, school districts and others can raise your property taxes with a referendum.
Exactly. And that's one thing that you'll see more of this week on In Focus. Our Russ McQuaid spoke with Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett this week. And Mayor Hogsett said, look, we don't want to raise taxes. And he says they hope they don't have to. But that is a reality that a lot of local communities and local school districts might face, that they may eventually have to raise taxes to make up for some of that shortfall, particularly now if state lawmakers have to go in and take a chisel to the budget again because of this revenue shortfall. That could have an even greater impact potentially on the kinds of cuts that have to be made and then the kinds of decisions that local governments have to make up that difference. So you'll hear more of Russ's interview with the mayor kind of talking about the impact that's going to have in local communities. He also spoke with the former mayor of Fort Wayne, Mayor Helmke, who's now a professor at Indiana University, who's kind of studying this very issue and the impact it's going to have on local governments, because it could be significant. There have been a lot of mayors who've really spoken out about this bill. And so on the one side, you have local communities who've been against this bill. You also have people within the Republican Party who've said they don't think the legislation that ended up being passed and signed into law went far enough. And so you actually have people kind of on both sides of this issue, perhaps a little bit unhappy with the final version of the bill. Micah Beckwith even, just this last weekend, the lieutenant governor came out and said he didn't like, where this bill had wound up at all. He had a rather kind of terse statement calling on the governor to veto the bill. Of course, then the governor signed it into law just a couple days later. But Lieutenant Governor had said he'd been on the phone with Hoosiers and government officials who said, nobody understands this thing, including me. He said, we can't let this become law. The governor needs to veto this thing. and call a special session. Of course, just a couple days later, Governor Braun signed it into law, celebrating the bill. And so again, and we know that the two of them aren't always in
On the same
lockstep.
page.
He didn't choose him as his running mate.
Right.
But there again, another just another instance of Governor Braun kind of trying to walk a tightrope there between those perhaps to his right flank in the party, and then governing for the entire state of Indiana and dealing with the impact and the reaction from local mayors at both parties who now have to deal with the impact of the bill.
Because at the end of the day, the governor wants to be able to walk away and say, I provided tax relief.
Sure.
But he still has to report to these mayors and superintendents and fire chiefs and say, well, I still left you some budget.
Right.
He has to walk that fine line.
But now again, because of what they just heard this past week
Correct.
at the Statehouse, everything is up in the air when it comes to the budget. State lawmakers have said they may have to look at things they weren't really even considering this late in the game. Things like perhaps significant increases in cigarette tax, a tax on alcohol, because of this $2 billion shortfall. I mean, they're going to be exploring things they weren't necessarily looking at this late in the game. So it's really going to be a very interesting last 2 weeks of session, no doubt.
Well, and as you said, the change and the worry now is because of this budget shortfall. Our Statehouse reporter Hannah Adamson talked with a number of lawmakers just this week when they found out the news that the budget that they thought they were going to have is not the budget they have. Let's listen to this report from our Hannah Adamson.
The General Assembly now has to figure out how to deal with a $2.4 billion budget shortfall with less than 2 weeks to go before the end of the legislative session.
Everything's on the table. I mean, we're gonna have to look at all that. I'm not being sarcastic.
The managed care entities, but we have a solution.
I've talked to the most senior economic guy around this building, and he's never seen anything like this.
And in the 21 years I've been here, I was here during the recession in 08 or 09 budget. This one scares me a lot more than that.
Committee. My name is Ben Tooley, and I'm the Director of Fiscal.
And we're going to have to make tough decisions. Can I make some cuts? If anybody has the audacity to come and ask us for more money, more than likely just take them out.
Maybe everything's on the chopping block except for when I say education.
All right, that's part of Hannah's reporting from this week at the Statehouse, where you hear leaders on both sides say, hold on, we have a problem, and this is worse than 2008.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty startling to hear from Senate Budget Chief Ryan Mishler there, saying that he's more concerned right now about the things they're going to have to do to work with the state budget than he was in the 2008, in the midst of the beginnings of that recession and the economic downturn that we saw then. And so, again, they're considering things. Marijuana has even come up over the course of the last 48 hours.
Because now you've got to generate some money or cut something.
And again, that's something that state lawmakers have been loath to do, even though it may be a budget generator. They've said, look, just because this thing might bring the state money, we want to look at it from a policy standpoint and really consider what it's going to mean, and not just have to do it because we need to raise money. But you've got the group Safe and Regulated Indiana this week. They're a marijuana advocacy group, and they said that this budget forecast news was an unfortunate reminder that the inaction that Indiana is missing out on what they say could be hundreds of millions or more in revenue that competing states are capturing. So it's something that I don't know that they're really going to decide to legalize marijuana in the course of 2 weeks before the end of the session.
Probably
but
not
just
in
the
Indiana.
fact that that's even coming up right now is pretty interesting. More likely would be something like that significant increase in the cigarette tax, which is something that some lawmakers that we've been speaking with, and you heard from some of them, they're saying is long overdue in their view anyway. Perhaps something like that gets enacted to help make up some of the difference with this $2 billion shortfall in what they had initially forecasted in terms of revenue for the state.
Can you explain at all how we got here? Because you do a budget forecast in December, and then now it's April. They're in the middle of session. They've already spent a good portion of the budget, more than half goes to public education, K through 12. And then you get this news. And from what I'm seeing thus far and what Hannah's story said, every article I've read says this has to do with the reduction in what is projected in what Indiana's going to bring in based off of our manufacturing and different things because of tariffs.
Right. A lot of it, much of it really is due to this federal uncertainty, this great uncertainty around what the economy is going to look like if these tariffs are indeed enacted again, if, after this 90-day pause, if more of these tariffs go into effect, what it's going to mean economically. It's just creating a real groundswell of uncertainty for state governments, for economic forecasters, and trying to figure out what the economy is going to look like. And so because of that massive amount of uncertainty, because of everything that's going on, the federal government, what the structure of the federal government's going to look like, what the economy is going to look like with the tariffs. Now you've got states really, really scrambling to figure out what they're going to do. And the timing's terrible, obviously. We're right at the end of the legislative session. They have just 2 weeks left. But this is when the forecasts come out. They do one after every quarter. So this first quarter just ended. They take a couple weeks to put the forecast together. You have had state lawmakers this past week, State Rep Greg Porter from Indianapolis among them. He's the ranking minority leader for the House Ways and Means Committee, say, hey, maybe we need to get these forecasts sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, they get a December forecast. Maybe there's some way they could, and this is a nonpartisan agency that does all of the budget forecasting for them. But you've had some lawmakers this week say, maybe we need to get this information a little bit earlier.
Is that why the governor signed SB1 so fast, you think?
Oh, I don't know. It's an interesting question that someone really should pose to him. But, I think that, again, like as you said, was a signature piece of legislation. He wanted to get something across the finish line. But again, you almost have to look at not just the budget bill, but at every piece of legislation that's still moving through the General Assembly. They're going to have to take a closer look at from that budgetary lens now of having $2 billion less. He's already signed Senate Bill 1 into law, so they would have to, do a quick undo piece of legislation to change that. But,
and from what I've seen, they've said that would be the last thing they cut. They want to leave K through 12 alone.
Yeah,
but everything else is on the table.
Schools, right? They want to leave funding for schools in place, obviously, but there is one local school district that actually, the Union School District, and Russ McQuaid is talking with them out in Eastern Indiana, that is actually affected by Senate Bill 1 directly because there was an amendment in that bill that essentially combines them with another school district. Right. But you also have other districts wondering, what in the world is this going to mean for them in terms of, the property tax impact, and now, this question about the overall state budget, which, still has to be sorted out here in the final days. The House passed its version of the budget, Senate passed their version. They've got to get together, and they would have had to anyway over this last 2 weeks of the session, the conference committee timetable. But now they're adding so many other factors into it because of this budget shortfall that it's going to be a tense time for everybody around the state, for schools and universities wondering about their funding. Yes, they've said that's the last thing they want to touch, but so many other aspects people are concerned about. When it comes to Medicaid, when it comes to other things that the state pays for, there could be some significant budgetary impacts here.
I had Brandon Brown on from the Mind Trust yesterday. We were talking about Senate Bill 1, what this meant, particularly for Indianapolis Public Schools, because they're another district that is going to be heavily affected by this. And we said, hey, look, every school wants more money. But right now, what he brought up the budget shortfall, he was like, you got to take whatever you can get at this point because there's not a lot to go around.
Well, there was that quote from Ryan Mishler that we saw in that piece from Hannah saying, if you come to us for more money, we're just going to tell you to get out.
Right.
We can't make any of those kinds of approvals for additional funding right now. And in fact, they're going to be looking to make a lot of cuts.
Is there what will the timeline as far as, I mean, these guys are going to have to work around the clock pretty much between now and the next 2 weeks.
Well, the session, they were hoping to be done with session on April 24th, which I think is a Thursday. They have by law until April 29th to finish this year's session, and they'll probably take every minute of what they have up until April 29th, now that they have to sort through everything with a finer comb to look at everything from a budgetary impact. I would imagine they would be working weekends, long hours, trying to figure out, and especially at this conference committee level with the budget committees, the Senate Appropriations Committee, House Ways and Means Committee, to try and figure out how they're going to do this. And I'd imagine they'd be there until the very late hours on the 29th for sure. 2 weeks to go.
Now, Dan, I know the governor, again, it's been his priority one. That's why it's literally Senate Bill 1, is to cut property taxes. I haven't got to see what the mayor told Russ, and we'll have to watch that Sunday on In Focus. But is there a concern now that, okay, if we're cutting property taxes, we're going to cut you from this one, so that's great, but now we're going to have to raise it from somewhere else? I mean, is in the next 2 weeks, is it going to be about cutting, or is it going to be about generating new money?
Well, I think a little bit about both. You know, they're going to have to look at things that they can take out of the budget that they have in there now, but they're also going to look at ways that they can raise revenue, and that's why these discussions about things like the cigarette tax may come into play. And then for the local governments, obviously they'll take some time to sort out the impact for them. And again, Mayor Hogsett says he's not looking to raise any local taxes, but realistically, a lot of local governments may have to consider that possibility. Local school districts may have to consider that possibility. They'll have a little bit more time to think about that. But at the state level, I think you're going to be looking at both sources of revenue and other things that they can cut here from the budget over these next 2 weeks.
I want to touch on that cigarette tax, and a few other taxes have been known as the sinner's tax.
Right.
They want to figure out a way. Those are in other states, as you said, marijuana. There are states next door that make a lot of money.
All of the states surrounding us.
All of them are making money off of that. In Indiana, of course, we always joke is going to be the last state to do it. But whether it's a cigarette tax that the Republicans have said absolutely not in past years, everything is on the table to generate some kind of more income. Now, there's none of these ideas are going to close $2.4 billion.
Sure. But I mean, they are talking about $2 a pack on cigarettes. I mean, that's a significant tax.
Yeah, they're significant
for those who smoke, and they think that could help, bridge the gap. And again, as you point out, that's a tax that some Republicans have opposed in years past. Not entirely. There are a number of Republicans who do favor a cigarette tax, and again, that's just the kind of thing they're really going to have to take a look at here. Some lawmakers saying it was just long overdue anyway. They think it could add $800 million back into the budget, not the whole $2.4 billion gap, but a pretty big chunk of it.
What would you say Governor Braun is a businessman and owned his own business, right. And I know that he has said that government should be run like a business. I guess I would be curious to know, and I'm not asking you to jump inside of his brain, but I'm curious to know what they think is easier to find things to cut or find ways to raise more money. Either way, it's just hard to do with 2 weeks.
That's the whole problem here. There's such a short amount of time to figure out what they're going to do, and so that does raise the question of, will they have to move into a special session? Will they have to go beyond this 2-week period, come back to the Statehouse over the summer to try to figure out how to do this?
Which is something they've said they don't want to do.
And they've done it before. They've done it when they have to. Ed Delaney, the state lawmaker from Indianapolis, Democratic lawmaker, has said that he's wondered in the past, shouldn't we look at the possibility of, instead of doing a 2-year budget every time, are there some budget cycles where we should do kind of 1 year at a time? And he wonders if this is maybe the right time to consider that approach, reopen the budget again, whether it's in a special session or in next year's legislative session. It's kind of hard for them to forecast what the next 2 years are going to look like with all of the uncertainty around the economy and around tariffs and around what the impact is going to be here in Indiana and elsewhere.
What do you think would happen next quarter? I know you're not an economist, but if next quarter we get another 3 months in, and then the projections are great because we're in this time of uncertainty, and at that time it's like everything is great, then what?
Well, I mean, that's the whole question about the tariff policy, I guess, is what economists, governments, businesses, they all like certainty. And that's what these tariffs have been taking from everyone, is that kind of certainty around what the economy might look like. And certainly President Trump has put these tariffs out there. He's put them on the table. He's actually enacted many of them. But most of the time, and not in every instance, there are some that are in effect. But a lot of the big ones, he's put there right up to the finish line, put them into action, and then immediately walked a lot of them back. And so we're going to put a pause on them. 90 days, whatever the case may be, 90 days in the case of a lot of these recent tariffs. And so it just sort of kicks the can down the road a little bit more and leaves a lot of uncertainty still about what things are going to look like here a few months from now.
And when we're selling internationally, buying internationally, that has a great effect on Indiana. We're the crossroads of America. But what I didn't realize until I started researching with this $2.4 billion shortfall connected to tariffs is that Indiana is in the top 10 of manufacturing states.
Sure. We're going to be most heavily impacted by
not
tariffs. There have been a lot of lists that suggest that Indiana could be in the top 5 or the top 10 in terms of states that might be impacted by some of the tariffs that the president has called for. So Indiana certainly could be in the crosshairs and face a negative impact from some of those tariffs on whether it be steel, aluminum, automotive tariffs. There's a lot of concern about it, no doubt.
Seems like it's happening also. Every day goes by fast these days in the world of politics, but it seems like this is hitting us faster than, we might have thought a couple months.
Right.
It's just April.
It's sort of been, it's interesting. Last week on our program on In Focus, we were talking mainly about the federal government and about the tariffs because it was last week. We kind of went back and forth on what the president was going to do, walked him back. For the news cycle that we're in now, it's been a fairly quiet week at the federal level because we're in this 90-day pause. There's other news out of the White House this week, but a lot of the news this week focuses on the impact now at that state level. And so most of our program on In Focus this Sunday when you join us is going to be about what in the world Indiana lawmakers are going to do, what's the city of Indianapolis going to do. You'll see, as we mentioned, that interview with Mayor Joe Hogsett. And so everything that happened last week at the federal level is now coming home to roost in states like Indiana, trying to figure out what the impact is going to be now.
Well, and it's funny that just in the past 2 weeks, when we were talking federal, the president, especially at the levels like the Department of Education, they were saying, we're going to give that to the states. And the states, including our governor, said, hey, we can handle this. We can take care of the financials. And now budget shortfall. And it's like, well, hang on. So it's putting everybody in a weird position of, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, it is raising a lot of questions. And so we're not only taking those questions, as we mentioned, to the mayor of Indianapolis and the former mayor of Fort Wayne, but to our panel as well. We've got Robin Winston, Terry Austin, Tony Samuel, and Mike Murphy on the show this week. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. 2 of them are former state lawmakers. So we'll try to get inside their brains and figure out what would you do if you were in the legislature right now? How would you try and solve this 10,000 piece puzzle that you have to finish in 2 weeks when it comes to putting the state budget together? And their insights are invaluable to us on this program. If you watch In Focus on a regular basis, they've really got a great depth of knowledge on how everything works at the state level, many years of experience, and different perspectives too. Our 2 Republicans on the show, Mike Murphy and Tony Samuel, come from very different wings of the party. Tony Samuel kind of comes from more of that maybe MAGA pro-Trump wing of the party, where Mike Murphy might be more of your traditional Republican, Chamber of Commerce Republican. And so they bring different perspectives on how state leaders should be dealing with some of these things. And I am very curious to hear what both Mike and Terry, as former state lawmakers, have to say about how they would deal with this situation now if they were still in the legislature, and what they think their colleagues are going to do about it, their former colleagues in the State House here over the next couple of weeks.
And that's 9:30 on Sunday.
Yes, on Fox 59, and 8:30 on Sunday on CBS 4. And if you're in another part of the state, you can watch it in Evansville, you can watch it in Terre Haute, you can watch it in Fort Wayne on Saturday night. We're on up against Saturday Night Live at 11:30 on Wayne TV in Fort Wayne after their news at 11. So you can get In Focus a little bit earlier if you're up in the Fort Wayne area.
Okay. Well, just like
get the plug in there,
just like on In Focus, we've got to take a commercial break, and we'll be right back. We'll talk about who came to town this week from the White House, one of their first stops. We'll give you the details coming up next.